Last image we worked on was really high contrast. This one's different. It's going to be in a really low contrast environment, really dark, and it's going to look like it's a really hard situation to be able to make a channel pull. So how are we going to break it out? I'm going to show you a lot of different techniques for extracting the best data that you can from any file. And it's not just in its native color space. We're going to work in multiple color spaces in order to extract information to make a channel pull. Great, so here's our image. Let's take a look. Now, depending on the contrast of your monitor, you might be able to just barely see the subject in this photograph. It's taken in a deliberately really, really low light environment. It's got gels, red gels coming in from the left, blue coming in from the right, and looks like against a gray seamless, really, really dark, very little separation in the information of the hair and the background. But we can still, using a number of different techniques, dig in and see if we can get some useful information from the channels. First thing I'm going to do is check out the raw file, see if I can get any more separation out of it. So it's really dark. I want to open it up a bit, see if I can bring open the blacks. Anything from the shadows? Really nothing hitting on that shadow end. I'm going to bring up the exposure just a bit. So that's not doing anything. I mean, I'm looking at the hair. I really want to get some kind of better separation in the hair. So that's about all I can do to open this up right now without starting to destroy information. So I'm going to bring that in. Now, the reason I was still able to access that raw file, you have to remember that step that I always emphasize is when you open raw files into Photoshop, you need to make sure, I'm double clicking on that, that this setting is clicked. Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. You access the workflow options by clicking down here, and you need to have this on so that raw file and all that raw information is preserved in your Photoshop file. So first I want to demo all of the different standard ways that you might do a channel pull that you might be used to seeing, because we need to just kind of be familiar with these so that we can build upon them in the later more advanced steps. I'll go through them pretty quickly. The first is calculations. Cool, so calculations basically blends channels together in different ways. Now, I, just like everybody else, just messes around with this so that we can eventually come up with something that looks good. We just try different channels blended together in different modes, usually add. Once we add the channels together, we get a much higher contrast image. We can blend together two different channels, the blue and the red. We can invert them, see what kind of results we get. Nothing really good coming of that. But this blue and blue looks pretty good. Green is less contrasty. Red and red, not so good. I think the blues have it. And we can also adjust the offset. Offset basically just lightens and darkens the entire image. That looks pretty good. And it outputs that to a new channel. I'm just going to label these. So we can see all the different options that we're going to stack up in here, so we know the path that we've been on, and we can choose what the best option is. Cool. So calculations took two of our channels and blended them together. I'm going to see if I can just pull something useful from the blue channel. So I just duplicated it by right-clicking on it, and I'm going to bring up a curve. and just crank on that curve until I get more contrast. Now, once again, I want to be paying attention to the qualities in the hair here, and I don't want to push it too far, so I start messing up the information or creating artifacts or chunks on the edges. So somewhere about there is my starting point, because once again, I'd go in and use those mask adjustment tools, the dodge and burn tool, to adjust this mask. I also want to make a comparison here between curves and levels. A lot of people choose to use levels over curves. It's not my preference, but I just want to show you that they're really not any substantial, there's not really a substantial benefit to levels over curves, in my opinion. So remember, as I go through this process of dealing with all these channels, the goal is just to find a way to create a really substantial amount of contrast, of difference between the hair and the background, because I want to find the most effective method for making a mask eventually that's going to knock this guy out. So I want to find the easiest way to do that. I'm going through all these different methods now because this is a problematic image. You may run into a problematic image too, that you have to try multiple techniques to be able to hone in on the right one for whatever the given job is. So with easy images, you might, especially after practicing all these different methods, you're going to be able to identify, oh, I'm going to go directly to that one because I know it's going to give me the results right off the bat. But if you have to test through a bunch of different ways to find a channel pull, this is the way in which you're going to do that. And we're starting with the basics, but we're going to build on these, and you're going to find some more really, really complex and powerful tools to be able to dig into the information that's in the file. So curves and levels. Once again, we're just demonstrating this here just to see the difference. There's a little bit of difference. I prefer curves always because they just tend to give me more control over the luminosity adjustment that I'm making. So I don't really use levels. So that's the basic methods for extracting from channels, pulling a channel from what exists here. What I'm going to do next is actually go back into the raw file. Now, this is a method that not a lot of people teach, and very few actually, I think, use often. But going back into the raw file, which contains all this extra information in it, and prepping that in a way that gives us a much better level of contrast between the elements that we want to separate. What I'm first going to do is duplicate the raw file by clicking New Smart Object via Copy. Now that's the same Smart Object. It contains the same raw file, but it's a new Smart Object, not a duplicate of this one. So when I change this new raw file, which I'll label color, it's not going to make changes to this raw file. It's still going to say the same with the same settings that I used to output it initially. Okay, let's double click to go into this raw file. Now, I'm going to go into the HSL grayscale panel, and I'm going to convert it to grayscale because I just want to look at that luminosity information. And it gives me all these sliders here. So what do I want to do? I want to mess with these sliders until I start to get a better level of separation. Let's see what happens with the red. Oh yeah, I definitely want that red to be darker. See how it's filling in there, giving me a better edge on the hair. Oranges, nothing's really moving. Yellows, nothing's moving. Greens, no greens in the image, so nothing's moving. Aquas, I could fill that in, that's fine. Blues, okay. So it thinks that the background is blue. So I'm going to crank that up a bit. Purples, thinks the background's got a little bit of purple in it. I'm going to crank that up. Magentas, let's see. Yeah, maybe magenta's back down. So you see how we've converted it to grayscale, and in the grayscale conversion, you're telling raw module what values you want the colors to translate into. So it's not only a really good method for adjusting the values in a grayscale image to create a more balanced grayscale conversion, but it's also a really good tool to prep your file for making a mask. So let's click OK out of here. And in the channels, I'm going to create a new one. Now let's look at the channels. Well, they're all the same because the raw converter created a grayscale file. So they're all going to be the same. So what I can do is go into my alpha channel, and I want to grab the RGB version and put it in there. So how do I do that? It's kind of tricky if you think about it. I mean, I can easily duplicate the red, green, and blue layers, but it won't let me duplicate the composite RGB channel. So here's a good tricky way to do that. Image, apply, image. So I'm going to go into image, apply image. I want the channel, the source channel, right here, to be RGB, which I'm going to apply to this channel in normal mode. So all that's telling Photoshop to do is take my RGB channel as a source. My target is this alpha 1, and I want to apply that to alpha 1 exactly as it is. So essentially, it's copying the RGB channel and pasting it into alpha 1. Now, apply image can seem a little mind-boggling at first, but we're going to use it a bunch more times in here. That's the most basic application of it, of basically saying, I want you to take this channel information and apply it to this other channel. Our alpha 1 channel was filled with black, and the other channel was just basically pasted in normal mode. So we're going to keep building on that complexity of using apply image in order to blend different channels in different ways. You'll see how it's done. So I've got this new channel now that was based on my grayscale conversion. And once again, I'm going to increase the contrast. It's about as far as I'm going to go with that. Anything more, I'm going to use the dodge and burn tools. I'm going to label that raw grayscale conversion. Let's just compare that with what else we've got here. It looks like the blue is maybe doing a better job than the raw, but look at the difference here because we plugged up that red. That area is getting a lot better separation, it looks like, than the blue. So these are the different comparisons that you want to make when you're trying all these different methods. Well, maybe one channel is getting me better results in this area, and the next process that I've used is getting me better results in a different area. So what we're going to start moving into next is combining those different results together to make one better image for extraction. Cool, so the next method actually builds on that raw conversion, and I haven't seen this done ever in any instructional resources, but this takes the raw conversion concept to kind of the next level. Results vary. Sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're pretty much just the same, but let's test it here. So I've created a grayscale image from this, and that's fine. But as I showed you before, all of the channels are exactly the same. It's because it's grayscale, right? You've got one thing, one output. But I'd like to have these optimizations that I did in the raw converter actually come out in a color image, because then all my channels are going to be different, and I've increased the possibility that there's better quality or separation in one of those channels over the others. Whereas now we just have 3 that are the same. I'd like to take a look at 3 that are different. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really easy. You just turn off convert to grayscale. Let's look at your first value here before we do. The reds I've cranked down to -78. I'm going to do the same thing here in the luminance panel, and see that red crank down there? I'm going to go back to my grayscale conversion. Thank you, RAW, for keeping these values. I think the next one that made any difference was aquas. Let's turn that off. We're still in the luminance panel. Crank down the aquas. That just kind of fills in the face. It's not hugely important. The blues we cranked all the way up, and the purples we cranked all the way up. Let's do that. That opened up the face. Let's close up the face as much as we can. Purples, open those up. The magentas, I remember we cranked down a bit. Let's see if that does anything. Click OK. And now we have that same grayscale optimization of our channels in a color version of the file. So let's look at the channels. So now I'm just looking through these channels that I've created, because now they're all different, right? I want to look through and see which ones I like. So I like blue. I kind of like red. See, red got really bright here because that's where the red is popping. Blue overall has the best separation and contrast. So I'm going to pick the channel that has the best separation and contrast overall and duplicate that. And I might be able to get a little mileage out of this red because there's a lot going on in this part of the face that's got high contrast. So how can I use that red? Why don't I use apply image, and instead of just applying it in normal mode to this blue copy that I made, I can apply it in a different mode. I'm going to go into apply image. I'm going to say my source, because I've duplicated the blue, I've got that as my base. I want to blend into it. So I know I want to do something with red. I don't really know what. So that shows me the red because this is blending mode normal. So if I go like this, it's just going to paste the red channel over the blue channel without blending it at all. So the blend comes when we choose the blend mode. So I know I would like to make blue, this blue channel, maybe darker up here and get even more separation, because I know that my red, I can see here, has better contrast in this area. So blending it in darken maybe. Multiply. See, I wanted to get darker, and that area in the red channel is actually lighter here. So what if I invert that channel? So it's darker now. And I'm going to apply that maybe in multiply. See what that does. So there's your first plate blend. If you're not used to doing this, it's what we call plate blending. It comes from the old pre-press days of actually combining plates. Now, since we're working in Photoshop, we can call it channel blending, whatever you want. But basically, the bottom line is you're taking the information that you extract from each channel, depending on what you want, what you like, what's the best, and blending them together to create a completely new channel in order to eventually make a mask from it. So now I'm going to run the same kind of contrast curve on this. See what I can get. Let's see how it compares. So what I would say is call this raw color, and this is how I label plate blends. R into B on multiply inverse R. So we're getting super scientific here, but it's great to always label your roadmap, because if you need to go back in and make some pixel changes that you didn't make early on and you need to redo these plate blends, you always have your notes here in the channels as to what you did to create that. It's really, really helpful. So as you can see, these are some pretty powerful techniques here for improving the information in the channels, getting more stuff out of it. But these aren't the only ways. The next step I'm going to go into is showing you the ways to convert to other profiles in order to look at new channels, because the old saying is every file has 10 channels. You know, you can thank Dan Margulis for that. But we know that LAB and CMYK exist, and those channels are going to look different than what we're looking at here in RGB or in the raw file. So let's take a quick run through those other color spaces and see if there are any channels in those files that might help us. So how do we do that? I'm going to take my file and I'm going to image, duplicate, merge layers. I'm going to convert to image mode LAB. Now, you don't really need to know anything about the LAB color space. Just know that the channels look different. Let's check them out. There's the lightness channel, there's the A channel, and there's the B channel. So the B channel actually, even though it's pretty gray, looks like it might have some good contrast. Let's just grab it, duplicate it. I think I probably want to invert it just so I can see it better. And let's see if we can throw a curve on that and get any better information from it. Once you get the hang of this, you're going to be able to do it pretty quickly. Yeah, that information in there looks pretty garbled. Lightness channel? Anything? So while you're watching me go through this, know that you would probably only go this deep into investigating channels if you're in a bind. And you need to have all these tools in your back pocket. Even if you don't know how to do them at a moment's notice, you have to keep in mind that they exist. That way, in the cases that you need them, you can go back and review this video, review your notes, review a worksheet that you made, and go through all these things, see if you can get something that works. So L channel has a completely different result. I'm going to select all, copy, paste into my working document, compare it to the other files. Maybe there's something I can use there at some point. Label that LAB. Now, just the same way, I'm going to bring this back to the duplicate that we made. No changes. I'm going to convert to CMYK this time. Doesn't matter what it is, just CMYK profile. Now look at the channels. Cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Right? Now it makes sense. Every file has 10 channels. Let's see if we can get anything out of the black channel. Paste it back into the working file. that black channel did a pretty decent job, but it's really bright over here on the left-hand side. So let's see here. That's really bright on the left-hand side. That's really dark on the left-hand side. This has got more contrast, this cyan channel. So why don't I duplicate my black, because I like that as my base. Now remember, I'm gonna go image, apply image, my cyan channel, inverted, multiply into my black. Now look how that closed up the left side of the face. That's a good result. That was K, right? So let's curve this, see if we can get anything. C into K. So you know just by that label you went into CMYK. That's what you did. So definitely an improvement over the K, right? One last thing that I want to do, show you custom CMYK conversion. Now this is going really, really deep into channels processing. Image, actually edit, convert to profile. Custom CMYK. Okay, doesn't matter what it is. Now all of this weird science is going to come up here. Don't worry about it. The thing that I want to do is switch it to UCR, set my black limit to 0. So my total ink limit is at 300. I'm going to click OK. Notice, so this is what it's done. It's taken a CMYK conversion, converted it from RGB to CMYK, and took all the black out. So what it's done is it's taken that black channel and applied it instead to the 3 other channels, C, M, and Y. So there's no black channel at all. And now those 3 channels in turn look totally different. So that's even more information that we can investigate to see if we get anything better. Okay, let's look at the channels. Nothing on the black channel. Yellow, magenta, cyan. Cyan doesn't really have good contrast. Magenta has okay. Looks like yellow is the best. So let's copy that. Paste in, run a curve. All right, this is great. I've got a really cool result here, and I'll show you what that is. I'm just gonna call this UCR no K Y channel. So that tells me I did a custom conversion in UCR no K, and I used the Y channel. So what I'm doing is I'm going back through and seeing what my results were, seeing what the best channels are that I retrieved. I'm still liking this UCR, but I'm also really liking this raw color with the red blended into the blue. I like that better than that. There's more separation. Blue still has some open stuff up there. I think I like these 2 channels the best. So I'm going to do one final blend. I'm going to try to put those together somehow. So I'm going to go into image, apply image. I'm going to find this raw color R to B multiply inverse as my source. That's too dark. What about darken? That's good. That's much better. Look how it's filling in the hair up here a bit, and it filled in up here. That just got us a little bit closer to a slightly better mask. Now, you gotta have you gotta balance the question of payoff. This was a lot of research to get a mask that is maybe marginally better than something else. So this is a very, academic instructional moment and process, but now you know that you have all of these possibilities in front of you from all these different color spaces, using all these different channels, using the raw processor in a way that can get you better starting results from a pretty whacked out looking file, but that results in a much better separation. So keep all this in your back pocket. When you need it, it's going to be very powerful. Great. So let's start making the mask and see what it looks like. I mean, regardless, we're dealing with an image that's really low contrast and really dark. So the information there isn't really good in the first place, but we're getting the best that we can out of it. And the overall image is going to be pretty dark, so we'll probably be able to get away with a lot on this mask edge. So I'm going into my burn tool. My dodge tool, excuse me. I set it to highlight, so it's still trying to target the brightest areas of the image. So you see how it's kind of leaving the hair alone? I'm gonna bring it down pretty small here. Whew, it's getting pretty crispy in the pixels on the edge here. All right, that's it. That's all I want. And maybe a little cleanup here. But I have the edge isolated, and that's good enough for me. I'm gonna hit the lasso. Go around the edge. Change it to white. Okay, we've got our edge isolated. That's all we need to do. Convert that. I hit O. Go into the burn tool. Wait, dodge, excuse me, because we inverted it. Once again, target highlights. So we can close that CMYK file. We don't need that. We've got what we need. Let's create a mask. So once again, I've already got this one clipped out, clipped inside the hair. Let's create that. Now, we're going to be putting this guy on a concrete background. I'm just going to drag that in real quick so we can see what we're dealing with. Let's darken that down so it's not quite so distracting. I'm going to transform that down just a bit to reduce the scale. Convert it to a smart object because I want to run blur as a smart filter on the background. Somewhere in there. That'll do for now. And let's add our hair edge. Set our selection from the channel. Hide that. Make sure you're on the mask. set to white, foreground color, everything's at 100, smoothing is low. Paint in our edge. Easy. So I'm not done with this mask. I still need to do a little bit of tweaking to get that looking better and integrated. And I'm going to go into the lovely smudge tool, which works great in a case such as this, where you've got a mask that is a little bit soft, let's say. And we know his hair's a bit out of focus, so we can use that to push some of the information around, smooth it out a bit, integrate it a bit more. Once again, I've got that selection on. Happens all the time. You gotta watch it. If you notice that you're messing with your mask and it's really not doing a whole lot, that's the culprit. Now, the thing to remember with the smudge tool is that it's so cool for shaping the edge of a mask. You can actually move the edge around, kind of like Liquify. Don't forget, it also softens it. So in those cases where you need to move an edge and soften it, it's like the perfect tool. And if you have an edge that's showing, like here on the ear, you can just tuck that in a bit. That edge goes right away. It's such a great tool for doing this kind of stuff. And don't forget, you can also use the blur tool if you want to just take that edge and soften it without moving it. So we need to darken up the background a little bit more for integration. And I'm going to add a gradation up to integrate the bottom more. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast, but darken this guy up a bit. I'm going to do a little bit of color here. Cool it off. We'd like a little feeling of red light coming in from the side. Oops. Overall, I want to soften this guy's mask up just a touch. And I can see this is really out of focus, so I'm going to use blur tool to really probably take that out of focus more, that edge. Okay, and I think overall he's running a little too saturated. I'm going to bring that down a bit. That integrates much better. One thing I think I'd like to do actually is to extend the canvas up just a bit to get a little bit better framing. Maybe about there. Now this is a bonus tip here. Show you a really cool trick. Our masks are all cropped now, right? Now, I don't know about you, but these gradations, I'd rather not noodle around with those and have to try to get them to extend up cleanly. I'll show you a great use for content-aware fill. So you go and edit, fill, content-aware. Click OK. It's very, very smart at extending gradients, whereas that might take you, I don't know, a minute or two on your own. Content Aware does it automatically. You can go through all your masks, Shift F5, Content Aware, just fixes them for you. This one we can just fill. Keep that in mind. That's a huge time saver. Now a couple of finishing touches. I'm going to merge visible, convert to a smart object, and I'm going to run my big high pass. Gives it some snap. And I'm going to put a grain layer on top too. So great. I mean, we've got a really cool looking image, and the extraction worked in a situation that we really thought that it may not have worked. I mean, that would have been the common evaluation from the beginning. Is let me set this up to the Camera Raw default so we could look at the base file here. I mean, it's super, super dark. So, that was a lot of exploration, a whole lot of exploration. I completely acknowledge that. And in a lot of ways, it seems like overkill for a single image like this, but this is what we're trying to learn here are these deep fundamentals of the way that files are structured in terms of their channels. They're like under the hood. Once you understand what's going on in the engine of a file, this is going to really inform all of your retouching, really, in the way that you think about files. Like we think about files so often as pictures of things. We almost think they are those things, but they're not. They're just these different ways of organizing data and information in a file. And I mean, you can probably tell I get really excited about the inner workings of these digital images, what's inside them. I want to be in complete control of all of those components. So I know a lot of this digging so deep may have seemed really tedious and academic, and it's like that for a reason, because I really want to convey my interest and excitement in what makes these files tick, and the way that you can reach in and pull stuff out that nobody else can. And now that you know these things work, you can start really experimenting, dipping back in, just trying a little part of what I taught you on any file, because you're going to get totally different results, and you don't know what's inside that file until you go in and start poking around. So I hope this was really, really valuable in the future at some point for you.